Thank you for deciding to learn lessons that's going to improve your ability to function as a real estate professional, whether or not you happen to be an agent or if you're an investor, if you're brand new to the business, if you've been in the business for a long time, you should get some value from these tutorials that you're about to receive over the next few days. So here today in tutorial one, let's just get started. First of all, my name is Ronnie Lucas, and I am the president here at Platinum Dynamic Institute. And also, I'm the broker for PDI Realty. And my companies are located in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I'd like to first get started by giving you some of my background as to how I got started. And what inspired me to go into the business of real estate was actually a person who drove up in an Eldorado Cadillac that was all jazzy and macked out when I was in the 12th grade in high school working as an attendant at a gas station on Interstate 95. Now, this gentleman drove up, I serviced him. He seemed to be very professional. I inquired as to what his profession was. He told me that he was in real estate and he was the one who suggested that I learn as much as I could about real estate. He said, you can't go wrong and you should pursue this as a profession. That message stuck with me and I did exactly that. Now, after coming out of school, obviously I went to college, and then after college, I went to the Air Force. And where I was first licensed was when I was in the Air Force at Travis Air Force Base in a place right beside Fairfield, California. And there was this one brokerage company. It was called Allied Brokers, and the broker's name was Jim Graham. And he had the most beautiful offices. I mean, they were the best looking offices that were around town. And outside, there were the best looking vehicles. You know, these Mercedes Benz, Porsches, BMWs, all these exotic sports cars. And honestly, these things captivated me and caught my attention. And so I said, this is going to be the company that I'm going to work for. So I went, I met with Jim Graham, the broker. We had some things in common. And he went ahead and he hired me. He said, look, you can come to work right here in my company. And he told me, he said, the reason my company is number one. Now, the company, Ally Realtors, had been number one every month, every quarter for more than 4 years consecutively. He accredited his ability to teach and to make sure that his agents were well informed about contracts, about financing, just various aspects to the business. And he said, when you come through it, you're going to go through an intense training program. But when you come out, he said, you're going to know more than most agents who's been in the business for over 7 years. Well, I went ahead and I joined them and I went through that very intense training, and it was exactly that. But the thing was, I was like a sponge. I wanted this information. So lo and behold, what do you think happened? I made the highest score ever of any student who had ever gone through. And again, I just say that was because I wanted this information so badly. But anyway, after that, I went through another very rigorous program that was learning from a gentleman called Tommy Hopkins. Now, Tommy Hopkins, he was considered the number one trainer in the business of real estate. And I remember his program was called The Art of Listing and Selling Real Estate. So that was the follow-up to the intense training I received from Jim Graham. And that's what got me on the path, was making sure that I understood the fundamentals. I got a solid background in that. I want to go back to some of the things that Jim Graham put a big focus on. And number one was contract. He was saying you got to know everything that's in the paperwork that you're having people to sign. You know, it's a must. And I agree 100%. But number two, it was understanding of financing. Now, at the time, I had very little knowledge about real estate financing. And so through the course, he spoke about institutional financing, and we went from private just a little bit, but where he put a lot of focus happened to be on FHA and VA. And I'm telling you, that was very, very good, simply because with FHA loans, that's where so many, especially first-time home buyers and second-time home buyers, they utilize this particular mortgage to buy, simply because it requires less money for down payment. So it was very good to know. Through the process and through the course, we learned various types of FHA loans, but the ones that stood out in my mind the most happens to be the 203B. And for your understanding, typically if you are speaking to a mortgage company or a banker and they're saying that you're going to get an FHA loan, for the most part, that is a 203B loan. So again, typically today it's about 3.5% down payment. So it's a very good loan for a buyer. But then number two, what Jim taught us was an FHA mortgage that was called the FHA 245 Plan B. Now I remember this simply because I learned to actually calculate this loan, and the unique aspect about this mortgage was number one, it would graduate. You start out the same dollar amount, the same money that was being financed. The buyer would pay a reduced amount in the first years, and each year that payment would graduate. And I think it was about 7.5%. So what was, I don't know, it was good for the ego too, was to be able to sit in front of a client and to figure out, okay, a plan 245 or an FHA 245 plan B, and to write it all out. A lot of things that we did there usually with paper and pencil, and to show it to them. And that would be very intriguing to the buyers. That enabled me to make a lot of sales simply because with the FHA 245 Plan B, the buyer didn't qualify for what the monthly payment would be once it matured after it graduated to its full amount that the buyer would be paying on a monthly payment. They only had to qualify on what it was in that first year. And so that was a reduced amount. And so that was very good. So made a lot of money with that FHA 245 Plan B. And then Jim used to tell us about this other mortgage that FHA had. And he would say, they got this one mortgage that will lend you money to actually buy a property. But in addition, they will make funds available so that you can renovate and make improvements to the property. Now, I have to admit, in California, I never did get to experience that. When I just thought about it, I remembered it. And it was later, after relocating to the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, that loan became popular. And here's what happened. In the beginning, I had written up a buyer to utilize an FHA 203K loan, and the deal fell all apart simply because the mortgage person who was processing this didn't know how to process the mortgage. They didn't know how to do it. And there were very little people. I mean, it was frightening people in the mortgage business at that time. And I happened to one day be speaking to this other mortgage professional, and he took it upon himself. He said, what I'm going to do is learn every aspect of this so that I can process these just as well as I do a 203B. And this person did exactly that. And he got it down to the point whereas he could take that 203K loan from start to finish and could settle it within 45 days. Now, that was a blessing. That was a blessing and a game changer, especially in the Washington, D.C. area, because back in the 90s, there was a lot of flight, and there had a lot of vacant properties that were in Washington, D.C., and most of these homes were in disrepair. They needed these renovations, and so it was a perfect scenario. And many buyers started coming in and capitalizing on that 203K loan. But my point in saying this is this happens to be something, education that I learned in 1979, 1980, and got to put it to work in the mid-90s. Now, last but not least, I want to talk about this VA mortgage. Now, VA offers what is called a guaranteed mortgage to bankers. And the beauty with the VA loan is it's 100% financing for the veteran, for the person who's going to be buying the property. And in the event that they default on payment and they've got to foreclose, the banker is pretty much guaranteed that they're going to recoup all of their money invested. So it's good for all parties that's involved with this. But here today is where this VA mortgage could be of the utmost importance to you. Now, listen to me. The unique aspect of a VA mortgage is the fact that it is assumable. And what I mean when I'm saying that it's assumable is one person who buys a property who happens to be a veteran qualifies to get that mortgage. And there are plenty of those mortgages that are on the market right now with interest rates below 3%. And there are even more that have interest rates between 3% and 5%. I think about 30% of all homes with mortgages in the United States today, that interest rate happens to be between 3 and 5%. So you catch my drift. There are a lot of those mortgages that happen to be out there. And when you take into consideration that interest rates today are hovering around 7%, we were hoping they were going to drop, but it didn't. So they're hovering up there. Major difference in what a buyer's monthly payment is going to be if they're trying to qualify at 7.5% versus capitalizing on one that's at 3% or 3.5%. That's what I'm talking about. So if you got buyers, or if you happen to be that buyer, and if you're a veteran, it's even better, because with a veteran, you can do what is referred to as a substitution of eligibility. Good for both the seller, good for you, the buyer, good for you if you're the agent, simply because you get to make that sale. The reason it's good for the seller is because once the buyer takes over that mortgage and substitutes that eligibility, that seller is now free to go back out and to get another VA mortgage. Now, it's extremely good for that buyer simply because this new veteran who's buying gets to capitalize on that low interest rate, reducing the amount of money they're going to have to pay. So this is awesome. And as I mentioned, with veterans, especially if you are around military bases, they're very transient. And so a lot of these veterans have those mortgages, and they might have an assignment where they've got to leave town. They have to sell. And so therefore, it just creates the perfect scenario for the new buyer to come in and capitalize on that old rate that is a very reduced rate. Now, I'll tell you, that is awesome. So I suggest that you take that and put it in your arsenals. Just put it there and utilize it quickly, because you can make a lot of money if you understand this concept and if you put it to work. Now, that's going to be the end of your tutorial for today, but I do look forward to coming back and getting with you in a couple of days. You're going to receive another email with another tutorial on it, and we're going to discuss other ways that will allow you to become successful in the business of real estate. So have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you. Ciao, ciao.